So we're looking at this whole area of accessibility, and what we mean by that is making sure that the courses we create in Gomo are going to be usable by the widest range of users, particularly those who might have a visual or hearing or cognitive or motor impairment. And we're going to explain and explore just what Gomo does to help you with that. And the good news, as we'll see, is that Gomo is going to do a lot of the work for you. But we're also going to have a look at things that you need to consider as learning designers to make sure that the courses you put together are as accessible as possible. So to start, let's just go and have a look at the first aspect of, if I can get my window to work there, of accessibility, where we're looking here typically at, say, learners with a motor impairment. What we mean by that is that they might have issues being able to use a mouse, but might be able to use a keyboard to navigate around. So essentially here, what does Gomo do for learners who can't use a mouse? And I'm just going to hop into an example. If you've been on these webinars before, you're probably familiar with this particular example. But here we're looking at how we can navigate here just using the keyboard. Now, the important thing is this is just the standard Gomo course, that we don't need to create a separate standalone accessible version of the course in Gomo. There are things within Gomo that we can use to enhance the accessible experience, but we are just creating one course that's going to be used by all learners. So in this case here, that we can see that what I can do here, I'm just simply hitting the tab key and reverse tab there, and it's just naturally taking me through natural tabbing order here. I can hit enter, and that's now taking me on to the menu. And again, I'm simply using the tab here, and I can select to go one of those menu options. And again, I can now navigate around here as well. And I can now select options and just I can immediately even go to the extent of answering questions. So that's purely using keyboard navigation. And a point to make here is that that is for somebody with, say, with a motor impairment, that they can't use the mouse. However, there's another area where we might want to consider keyboard navigation, and that's for learners with a visual impairment. And typically, those learners would be using the courses with a screen reader, such as JAWS. And this is a slightly different situation from somebody who's purely just wanting to use the tab keys and enter key to navigate about a screen that they can see. And the important thing here is that an experienced user of a tool like JAWS will be very skilled and very familiar with the quite sophisticated ways that JAWS lets you navigate around a screen, essentially how to interpret a web page. And essentially a Gomo course is a web page. It is just generating HTML. And with that a JAWS user would know essentially how to read ahead on the screen, for example. And it goes way beyond just hitting tab keys to move from element to element. They would be able to get a sense of what the actual screen is about and how they would navigate through it. And I'd caution you here that there can be an issue particularly if you're new to accessibility as a subject area. You might think, oh, I better check whether my Gomo course works with a screen reader like JAWS. So you might download the free trial of the JAWS screen reader, the time-limited version. You fire it up and go into a Gomo course, and quite often we then get people contacting our Gomo support desk saying, I've tried Gomo with JAWS and it doesn't work. Gomo obviously isn't compatible with JAWS. Now, we've put a lot of work in working with customers and learners who use JAWS, so we know that that's not the case. But what can happen is that when we first start using JAWS, that we don't realise all the clever and sophisticated ways that you can use JAWS and how an experienced JAWS user would expect to navigate through it. So one thing I'd suggest there, if you are interested in experimenting and testing out with JAWS, is I'm just going to go here to show you the keyboard shortcuts. This is from Freedom Scientific, who make JAWS. And this shows you all of the range of shortcuts here that a JAWS user would expect to be able to use. And as we can see, there is a very, very wide range of all these keyboard shortcuts that go far beyond just hitting tab and so forth. It's being able to move from element to element, to be able to read ahead and so forth. So really to do proper JAWS testing, then you need to learn JAWS, but ideally that you would work with a user of JAWS, somebody who's very familiar with JAWS, to be able to test your content with for you. So, so just a warning there in terms of screen readers and particularly JAWS and the expectations of JAWS users there. But let's jump into Gomo itself and have a look at how Gomo helps you in terms of building an accessible course and the things that you can do as learning designers to really enhance the experience for all learners in terms of accessibility. So I'm just going to jump into Gomo itself. For those of you who are completely new to Gomo, it is entirely cloud-based. You don't install any software. All you need is a browser and an internet connection. I happen to be on Chrome on the Mac today. Of course, you could be under Windows using Edge or Chrome, whatever your platform, standard platform or browser is. Gomo should work with that. I'm just going to go into Gomo authoring itself and just log in again here. And this takes me to my team account. I can be organizing my courses maybe by team member or subject area and so forth. But let's go in and just build a course so we can see that how that process works. And we're going to focus specifically on the elements to do with accessibility. So on the left here, I'm going to click on create a new course. And here Gomo is just going to ask me a few questions to get me up and running. So I'll just give it a name. Call it accessibility. And don't forget that Gomo's got great support for helping you to create a single course and making it available in multiple languages. And the learner can just switch between the languages there. And I cover these in one of the other weekly webinars, particularly to note that we've now introduced AI automatic translation as well to assist you with creating multi-language courses. Now I'm just going to click next. This is about what we call a theme. This is a style template, which can control things like the colors and fonts and so forth. And what we can do is take one of the built-in themes and then use the theme editor. And this can be important from an accessibility point of view because the theme can sort of encapsulate good practice in terms of color combinations, font sizes, and so on. So you could be setting up a theme which is going to use nice sort of color contrasts, correct font sizing for all learners in there. Today, I'm just going to use one of the new built-in themes called Pontic. This is about the structure of a course. So a Gomo course isn't just like a PowerPoint deck where you start on the first screen and move to the end. We have these higher level building blocks called topics. And in turn, those topics are broken down into a sequence of screens and we can link the topics together in different ways. So I'm going to choose that I could want an introduction, I want a menu. I'd say I need 4 topics to start. And now these are the elements which are going to appear in the toolbar. So in that earlier example here, we had things like glossary and help and so on. So these are the elements that we're choosing here. Now, importantly here, what we can do is we can add in an accessibility switch as well. And what this is going to do is enable the learner to put the course into an even more accessible mode. As we saw from that simple example with the keyboard navigation, any Gomo course in that sense has good accessibility, but we're going to explore exactly how much further we can go using this accessibility switch there, but I'm just going to click Create. And it's going to look at the number of topics I've chosen, the theme that I've selected there. It's going to create an outline course structure for me with some sample content to get us going. And then we can begin to explore the accessible aspects of that. So here we go. This is my top level building blocks. These are the topics. I've got an introduction leading into a menu, simple branching out to the learning topics. Of course, I can have more complex structures. I can have subtopics there. I can even have adaptive learning, sort of dynamic branching. Again, I cover this in one of the other weekly sessions. An example of that is you ask the learner to select their job role or job function when they come into the course. Gomo remembers that, and then what the learner sees on any given screen or their whole journey through the course can depend on the choices they've made. So it's the same course, it's just adapting it to itself to the choice the learner makes. Also, we have these elements here in the toolbar, and we've added in that little accessibility icon right at the bottom in the toolbar. I could put those in the top instead. So let's now go into the editor here, because this is really where we get to the heart of accessible design in Gomo. So I'm just going to click on this first topic. It's going to open up another tab here in my editor. And so here on the left-hand side, that we have the screens. Gomo's added in 2 dummy screens for me already. I can have as many screens as I want in here. But when I click on that screen there on the left, it loads the content into the content area. Now, really importantly here, from the point of view of accessibility, that we're not dealing with a sort of fluid canvas layout. This isn't sort of 1800 pixels wide. I'm not sort of having to nudge this around the screen to be 100 pixels from the left. Instead, we work in this block and column layout. Now, the main benefit of this block and column layout is it makes sure that the course content will automatically run across any screen size, any device, any orientation. So you don't need to create a desktop version and move everything around for a tablet, move it around again for a smartphone. But also, from the point of view of accessibility, this gives us a very natural tabbing order. So at the top here, when I click on the block, we can see here on the right-hand side, we can see the properties. I can divide that into a number of columns. And this block and column layout is then going to give us this tabbing order. By tabbing order, we mean what happens when you hit the tab key on the keyboard, as I was doing in that earlier example. So what it's going to do is start in the top block that we have here and go into the first column. In this case, we've only got one column. And then if we tab further, it's going to take us to the second block. And again, we have this natural order where it will go from the left-hand column over to the right-hand column, and then on, in this case, to the third block, where again, we just have a single column. So we don't have to go through assigning a tabbing order in Gomo as you do in some authoring tools, that it naturally falls into this block and column layout. And certainly, if you're new to Gomo, I highly recommend experimenting with this block and column layout, particularly for multi-device output, but also the way that that then affects our accessibility and the tabbing order there. The other thing is that we don't need to worry about fonts and colors and sizes and so forth. That's coming from my theme, where I can be setting up the correct color contrast and so forth. So here, when I'm editing the text, I don't have a font button. I just select a style, and then it will already be set up with the right colors and fonts and so forth automatically there. And I can see that by going into my instant preview there to see what it would look like. Let's have a look at the other things that you need to consider as learning designers in terms of accessible design. And the first thing is about images. In Gomo, wherever you put an image, you can put a description for that image. So when I click on this image here, you see in the properties on the right-hand side, this is where I can put description. And this is what a screen reader like JAWS will read out as the learner moves into that particular part of the screen through the keyboard navigation. And as designers, it's really good practice for whenever you build a course, even if you're not necessarily building with accessibility in mind. Just get into the habit of wherever you have an image which is going to convey any kind of meaning, then to put a description in it. So here in the description box, I could just put something like a laptop, computer, for example. So that description there is what's going to be read out by a screen reader. It's also so-called alt text that if you move your mouse over that in the course itself, that's what it's going to display. But let's say importantly, it's what a screen reader will read out. So always get into the habit of just checking that, making sure that you've put descriptions where it's going to be relevant, where that image is conveying information. The second thing is to do with supporting people again, say with when you've got audio in a course, that if you have somebody with a hearing impairment, obviously just having an MP3 audio file isn't going to be the best experience for them. So let's just go over on the left here to the Assets tab. And these are all the things that we can add into a Gomo screen. And what I'm going to choose here is the audio player. And here we can just browse for a particular audio clip. But importantly, when we look at the properties here on the right, this is where we could put the audio transcript text. So that's where you would go and put in your audio transcript. And what Gomo will do then is let's go to the full preview then, that if it sees some text in that transcript box, it will automatically switch on a transcript button, which the learner can click, and it reveals the actual transcript text itself that you've put in. So again, in terms of design, always make sure that if you're putting in audio, that you consider putting in the audio transcript as well. So that was back in the audio player properties there, and that's where you would put that. And also we can do the same in terms of video. If I just add in a new screen here, and I go to the media section again, I drop in a video. So again, here on the properties on the right hand side, this is where I can put in the video transcript. That can be fine. The problem that you have with that is that if it's quite a long video with quite a lot of audio, quite a lot of talking going on, then your actual video transcript is actually going to be really long, and might be quite difficult for the learner to be both watching the video for what's going on visually, and then also reading the text of the audio there. And that's why we also support closed caption files, so that essentially subtitles. And we support the standard VTT format. That's the sort of the international standard for captions. It's just simply a structured text file showing what text should be shown where. So in this example, I can go in here, play the video. I've got the transcript, but also I can switch on the timed captions there, which makes it a lot easier in a long video to be able to just watch the video and then see the captions, which are then synchronized to the audio. So the point there is both to do with you can have a video transcript where all the text appears at once, or if you want those timed captions, those subtitles, then use a VTT file there in the video player. Okay, so those are things that you should really think about for any course that you're putting together. And that will mean that all learners will have a good experience. But finally, I want to show you how in Gomo you can go further than that. You can actually craft the accessible experience, and that's using that accessibility button where the learner can put the course into an even more accessible mode. So we don't need to create a completely separate version of a course. All we do is just make some modifications if we need to certain parts of the course to make them even more accessible. So what happens there is when the learner chooses to switch the course into the more accessible mode. So here we've got the little accessibility button there that the learner can click or select with the keyboard. Then two things happen. Gomo does certain things automatically, namely removing screen transition animation. So as the learner moves from screen to screen, they don't sort of slide in and out, which can be quite visually confusing. Instead, they'll just switch from one screen to another. So Gomo does that automatically for you. But importantly, for as learning designers, what it's doing, it's setting a flag to say, I am now in the more accessible mode. And we can use that just to enhance and craft the accessible experience. And an example I want to show you here is that, just going to add in another screen, is that we've got a question type called a drop-down list on graphic. This might typically use, say, as a map of the world where you have drop-down lists of capital cities and the learner has to select all the right capital cities and all the lists to be able to get the question right. Now that's visually and navigationally quite complex. So what we can do in Gomo is that we can detect that accessibility flag as in the course has been switched to the more accessible mode. And then using a technique called display conditions, where you can show and hide things on the screen based on certain things happening. Then, and we use the display conditions in various other these webinars to lock screens. But here we can craft the accessible experience. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to put in this drop down on graphic question. So the way here, by default, you can see that we've got these lists there. We can have as many lists as we like on top of the graphic, but that's visually and navigation quite complicated. So I might say, well, actually, if the learners put the course into the more accessible mode, I want to be able to hide that particular question, instead show something visually and navigationally simpler, like a multiple choice question. So I can add in a multiple choice question here. So I'll just drop that in there. Now, as it stands, then learners would see both versions of the question, but we want to change that to say, we'll show this question when it's in the standard mode and this question if the learner switched it into the more accessible mode. And we do that with display conditions. So I just click here and any element you can add in display conditions on the right hand side. We see here we've got the display condition button. So wide range of display conditions, and we've used these in other webinars, but the one that I want here is the accessibility state. And here we're going to say if the accessibility state is false, which really means that if the learner hasn't switched it into the accessible mode, then we want to show that version. And we do the same for the simplified version of the multiple choice here. Just go to set display conditions. Same display condition, accessibility state, but now we say if it's true. So if they've switched the course into the more accessible mode, then show this version of the question. So let's just go and see what that looks like. So here we go. Now we haven't switched into the more accessible mode, so we're seeing the full drop-down list on graphic. Now at the top here, if I just click the accessible button, it's now triggered that display condition, so it hides that original question, instead shows the simplified version there. And we can toggle between the two there. So it's a really powerful technique if you do want to go that extra step and really craft the accessible experience. But the important thing is that you don't have to do that. So you don't have to create a completely separate accessible version of the course. Any Gomo course is going to have very good accessibility. It's just that you can use that accessible display condition if you need to, just to refine that experience. And finally, just to point out that we are continually improving the accessibility of Gomo courses based on having external testing done, feedback from our customers and learners. And if you want to find the detail of that, you can go to our support site, support.gomolearning.com, in the community portal and search on accessibility. And one thing that you'll find there is what we call the conformance report. This is so-called VPAT statement. This goes into very great detail, essentially giving you guidance for how you can make sure that your Gomo course in effect conforms to WCAG 2.1 AA level if you need it. So if that's going to be important to you, do go and have a look at that. It goes into all the detail here about um, how different Gomo elements are accessible. Also, you'll find release notes here, Gomo accessibility updates. If you want to find the latest things that we've enhanced and improved in terms of accessibility, just go to the updates there.